breakfast today?
I had a muffin and a protein shake.
What flavor muffin though?
It was a banana chocolate chip.
Banana chocolate chip?
Yeah,
I've never
banana
had
chocolate chip.
I'm kind of basic. I just get chocolate chip.
The wife made it actually. I'm on a strict diet. Once you get like above 35, then you got to start watching. Well, it should be like above 25, but like I waited. So yeah, it's strict. Like a piece of fruit, a protein shake, and like a muffin or a granola bar or something. That's pretty much steady diet.
That is a good diet though. I gotta get on that because my diet's bad. Like I had a Jamaican beef patty for breakfast this morning.
You got to indulge every once in a while, right? Like you can't live a boring life.
Yeah. So, of course. Okay, so I guess starting off right off the bat, what does basketball mean to you?
It's opportunity. It's a passion. It's a dream for a lot of kids. I guess for myself, it's kind of like a purpose. Through my role working in the Peel Board as an educational assistant / child and youth worker, it allows me to connect with kids on a different level. A lot of the kids that I've worked with over the year, they've lacked the drive or desire to go to schools based strictly on academics, and basketball gives me an opportunity to kind of bond with them in a different way and provide them with that motivation, I guess, to strive for more, to expect more.
And you mentioned passion, which you can go a little more in depth with exactly where that passion for coaching came about. Like what led you to get into that aspect of basketball?
So from day one when I got hired for the Peel District School Board, it's funny, I had zero intention to ever coach basketball. I didn't play organized basketball growing up. I was a soccer player growing up. That was my number one sport. But in terms of as a spectator, I loved basketball. I was in love with the game. Bramley provided an opportunity, or I saw an opportunity, because when I started there, they had two separate basketball teams and it wasn't a program. And we had this junior team that was really good and had this community coach that was very structured, and they had a ton of success. Won some Tier 2 championships in that. And then we had the senior team that was in disarray, that these kids had a great program, grade 9 and grade 10, and then when they moved on to grade 11 and 12, it was like they were forgotten. And a lot of those kids that I felt were forgotten were kids that I worked with on a regular basis, kids that I saw the best in them, where unfortunately some other people within the building didn't see the positives or the strengths that they had. So I decided I wanted to provide those kids with an opportunity, and even though I didn't play organized basketball, I'd never coached a team before, I took it upon myself to learn the game so that I could provide them with that opportunity, so that they could have structure, so they could have consistency, and not just fall through the cracks or be forgotten in their senior years of high school.
No, for sure. And I think that is one of those main things with sports in general that is able to bring people together. And even looking at other sports like soccer, football, but when looking at basketball in particular, there's something unique about that. And what for you would you say makes basketball unique compared to other sports out there?
Accessibility is one, now is different. When I was a kid growing up, there wasn't basketball nets on every corner and that kind of stuff. The rec centers were primarily ice rinks that you went to. There wasn't a lot of indoor facilities where you could go and play in the wintertime and that kind of stuff. So the entry point, right? Like any kid, you already have a pair of sneakers. They don't necessarily have to be sport specific. All you need is a ball. You could get a ball and you go to almost any park now in and around the GTA, any rec center now, a lot of them are being converted to have basketball courts. So it's like in comparison to a football or a hockey or a lacrosse or something like that, like it's just your price point is a lot less to get into, so it's available for a broader range of kids. You could say that hockey is kind of an elitist sport, right? There's only a certain amount of people that could actually afford to play that game, whereas to me, basketball's for everyone.
And that is true. The accessibility is one of the main things that people love with basketball. And especially you mentioned earlier that you didn't coach, but you've been a fan of the game, been around the game. You brought up Bramley before. You were a student at Bramley and able to be a teacher there and also be the coach there. What was the basketball landscape like when you were a high school student compared to what it is now?
I would say it was inconsistent. When I was a kid coming up at Bramley, a student there, I wouldn't say that there was a whole bunch of school spirit. The gym wasn't packed full of kids dying to watch the senior boys basketball game every week or twice a week. And I don't think there was the same level of talent that was there. That's for one. And I don't know if that's attributed to the influx of immigrants that came into the area, and hockey not being their number one sport, it being something else, combined with, I think, the level of coaching has gotten better over the years as well.
Yeah, that's the one thing. And would you say that people who have made a way to get out of this area, they made a career from sports and now coming back into the communities has been a great pushing point for the youth to be able to see that, hey, this person who was in my shoes once before was able to do it, and now that I see that they did it, they can do it as well. Would you say that?
Yeah, for sure. Like when I was a kid growing up and we watched basketball and you looked, like there was one or two Canadians in the game, right? Like you went through the Rick Fox generation, Todd McCullough, Bill Wemington, on to a point where like Steve Nash was the only one, and then Jamal McGlure had a shorter lived tenure, coming up through Eastern Commerce and then making an all-star game with the Hornets. But then for this next generation, from Corey Joseph and Tristan Thompson kind of paving the way in that draft to moving on to, I think it was Kelly Olynyk the following year, and the Kem Birches and the Tyler Ennises, on to the Anthony Bennett, Nick Stauskas, Andrew Wiggins, like on and on. Kids got to see people from their own communities making the NBA. Instead of there being one guy having success in the NBA, there started to be a couple dotted on the rosters, and it was like, this is a reality. If those guys can do it, then I can too.
And you mentioned great names, Andrew Wiggins, Corey Joseph, Tristan Thompson, all those people who started their career in high school in local places like in the GTA, but then went elsewhere to play prep basketball. Andrew Wiggins, Huntington Prep, but now you look at the landscape of Ontario and even in Canada in general, the amount of prep schools have risen drastically within the past 10 years. What are your thoughts on this development in the high school scene?
There's pros and cons to it. Like I'm all for keeping Canadian talent in Canada. I think that's big. I think kids seeing the pathway was, your senior years, you go to a prep school in the States. From there, you get the exposure, and then you go on. And at the beginning, that being a pathway, it was okay. But for a lot of parents, they don't want their kids to just disappear from home at young ages, 15, 16, 17 years old. Not everybody's ready for that jump. So I support building that infrastructure here in Canada and having the places where those kids can play. Jamal Murray at Orangeville Prep went from a Canadian prep school on to Kentucky. AJ Lawson went from DeVille to GTA Prep on to now he's playing for the Minnesota Timberwolves. So that is great. I fear that some of the programs have grown too quickly, and some of them have kind of have people that are involved for the wrong reasons, that might be looking at it as they're trying to make a name for themselves or trying to get in it because they see monetary value attached to it, whether that could be a career path for themselves, creating this prep school, as opposed to just trying to build opportunities for kids.
No, for sure. And we're seeing people get their children and parents get their children into sports at such young ages now, and they're getting training regimes that are similar to professional athletes, and it's obviously with prep schools and the way they're going, it's kind of a tricky way to try to balance how do you give the children their youth but also give them a career as well. But also looking at this development, we look at Ontario as a basketball hub. It's known as arguably the best province in Canada producing basketball talent. Quebec is getting up there as well, but Ontario is definitely there. And with the GTA being at the forefront, where would you say the GTA ranks among the notable basketball hubs in the world?
I think it's got to be up there. I think there was a statistic that came out a couple of years ago. I don't know if it was Andy Katz that came out with it or it was Jonathan Genovi that was with Draft Express, but there was a point in time where there was more NCAA Division I talent that was coming out of the GTA than there was coming out of the entire state of New York, which that's big. That we were doing a better job from the grassroots up, getting these kids ready to play post-secondary ball than arguably like the mecca of basketball. So I think that was saying something.
For sure. And you look at a place like Toronto, for example, and the way they've been able to develop talent, and also places like Brampton, Mississauga, and the athletes being able to come out there seeing a career that could be achievable through sports. What would you say is the biggest challenges to obtain a basketball career for a Canadian high school athlete?
The competitiveness of it, right? Like in terms of the opportunities directly through sport to continue playing, There's only so many NCAA Division I scholarships available, right? There's only so many spots in the NBA available for those kids. So I think one of the biggest things is how competitive it is to get in those roles. Like the people that are successful, like you have to be driven. And a lot of the times that has to come from within. You have to seek out the opportunities and really want it. Because unfortunately in Canada, hockey is still number one, and trying to get rid of that old regime and realize that we're a basketball nation, we're a soccer nation. That takes time, and it's getting there, but I don't think it's quite there yet.
Oh no, definitely for sure. And I see it also going on the trending upwards towards basketball being perceived as one of, if not the best sport in Ontario, in the country, with the way that the success of the teams you can look at in basketball and the way that people are leaning towards basketball. You mentioned accessibility being a huge thing. And going back into the discussion of your career as a coach, as a high school coach, what lessons do you instill in your players? Like what goes into your coaching strategy and your philosophies that you try to get into your athletes?
Just like a level of accountability, responsibility, that kind of stuff. I try to teach life lessons and prepare people for outside the world, how you should treat every day, how to be disciplined. I think little things like I like to keep my gym clean. So when you walk in, if you're putting your bag and your jacket down, you're not just throwing them off to the side. I want to see them neatly tucked, stowed away. I want to see your jacket somewhere. It's having respect for that gym that you're in, the same way you would have respect for your household, or how you would be seen in public or in a classroom or in the workforce, and having that pride in yourself. One of my big things at Bramley when I got there, we had these old ragged jerseys. And one of the big moves I wanted to make is I wanted to make sure that we had nice, crisp, clean ones. Things that when kids put them on, they felt good, they felt proud, they felt like they were powerful, or they had a certain level of respect just from wearing that, right? It was the kind of the look good, feel good, play good, but how that translates into life, how you treat yourself, how your how own appearance, how other people perceive you, that kind of stuff. We're trying to teach them that, the responsibility, the dedication, the attention to detail, like those kind of little things.
And those are things that I think make sports so great, that even though you might not make it into a professional landscape, you could take things like that in the sport environment into your everyday life. And looking at some of these high school basketball players, especially in the past, many high school basketball players might have quit a career in basketball because of lack of opportunity, with the NBA being a long shot for most athletes. But now with the development of leagues such as the CEBL and other Canada organizations, Raptors 905 being a present one, do you think that there will be a more trending upwards of Canadian high school players pursuing a career now that seeing that the NBA is not the only option that is out there for a professional career?
I think so. I think, we've maybe just seen the tip of the iceberg. Like, I think that more and more kids are going to realize that there's opportunities for them, whether that is playing or that's post-playing, whether that's getting into a position of coaching, mentorship, getting into sports media, those kind of things. I think it's now possible, right? Like back in the 80s and 90s for me, like the possibility of being a professional basketball player didn't exist. It was never even considered, but everybody grew up thinking that I'm going to be the next Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, Mark Messier. Whereas I think now these kids coming up, looked and said, I'm going to be the next Vince Carter, I'm going to be the next Jamal Murray, I'm going to be the next Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, to the next Ben Mathurin or the next Shaden Sharp. Like it's kind of switched to that this is a reality for them. A big part of that, I love the joint partnership between university sports here and the CEBL, and that you have university level players getting an opportunity to play alongside professional players in the CEBL throughout the summer, and then returning to their university teams to finish out the year. Like players like Thomas Kennedy, who years ago might have been forgotten at Windsor, has now played for the national team, is moving on, gets to play in the CEBL, to who knows, now the possibility of him getting a contract to go overseas, or maybe a tryout with the 905 or even the NBA. I think that's more possible, where 20 years ago that pathway didn't exist.
And that's the beauty of the growth in the game that's happening. It's only going to get greater as it goes on. You mentioned the CBL, they've even expanded their league every single year. One team, two teams have been added to that. And you've mentioned the growth from 20 years ago, the reality, how much would you attest the development of the Toronto Raptors towards that growth and change in the basketball culture in Canada?
Well, it's massive, right? Like without the Raptors, like who knows where basketball would be. For me as a 6, 7, 8-year-old, like I was a Michael Jordan fan because back in those days there was a limited amount of basketball games that came on TV. You only got to see the primetime games and when, you know, Michael or Magic or Larry or someone of that stature was playing. So it was limited to that. Toronto gets a team and boom, there's a game on almost every other night. It's in your city. You could just go down the street and watch it. And then with Vince Carter coming in and kind of putting Toronto on the map for basketball, being one of the up-and-coming or most exciting players during that time, like obviously helped the sport.
Definitely. And then you see everything that happened in 2019 and the way that captured the entire country. Yeah. And who would have thought that basketball would have had how many cities having watch parties that people would have thought only hockey would have been able to pull. And more specifically, would you say the Carter effect itself, what was the importance of that, especially being someone who was around when that exactly was booming and surging in that time?
Well, I think the Carter effect was paramount. And you hear the professional players that are in the NBA now, the Canadians come up, they will tell you that Vince Carter was their Michael Jordan. Like that's who they looked up to and who they watched. That's who they emulated their game after. Shaedon Sharpe, that was just drafted this year, he attests a lot to what he tries to do on the basketball court was that he was inspired by Vince Carter. You know, at 6'5", Vince was 6'6", plays a similar position, similar set, similar size, body type. That definitely, like having Vince Carter, like you saw it, you know, you saw the street hockey nets out in the middle of the road switch over to the basketball nets at the end of everybody's driveway. You know, it was kind of that shift through the late 90s into the early 2000s.
Definitely, and that shift itself has changed so much, and we're only going to see different shifts going on forward in the future. And speaking of that, where do you see the landscape of basketball within the GTA heading within the next 5 years?
I'm not sure. That's a tough question to say. You know, I think for myself personally in the high school scene, high school basketball within your own region has become less competitive, but the prep schools are now on getting this massive spotlight. You know, you have coaches like Coach K and Calipari and stuff that are coming to Canada to scout kids, which never happened back in the day. Where is it 10 years from now? Who knows? You know, our regular traditional high school program's going to cease to exist completely. Are the prep teams going to take over? I don't know. I really don't know. But I'll still be here coaching.
And speaking of you still being here and coaching, what are some goals or aspirations you have career-wise in the high school scene that you would like to do for Erindale or your future endeavors?
I just want to help kids get better. I just want to give kids an opportunity. You know, every year, like, you want to win, but, you know, you're limited to the talent that walks in your gym. You try to get them as good as you possibly can, and then you compete at the level that you think that they are capable of competing at. Specifically here at Erindale, like a couple of years ago, we were able to go to AA OFSA and have that experience with a group of students. So that's kind of become the bar. That's where we would like to return. And then once we can consistently compete at that level and we can achieve that goal, then we look at where we're going to push the bar to and what's the next goal that we're going to strive for. We've got to the point now where we're no longer a Tier 2 program, that we want to compete in Tier 1 every single year and do that consistently. And then as we move on, maybe we look to be one of the teams competing to make a spot at AAA OFSA as opposed to AA.
For sure, and I'm sure that's going to happen in due time, for sure. And then final question to wrap things up. What is one word of advice you would give to an aspiring high school athlete who's pursuing a professional career in basketball?
It sounds cliche, but like never give up. Like if it's something that you have a passion for, pursue it. There's always going to be naysayers and people that are going to doubt you and say you can't make it from here, you can't make it from there, or it's too competitive, don't even try. But if you don't try, you don't realize what you might achieve. There could be different opportunities presented to you or that come up because you are pursuing that passion, whether that be from coaching or media or some mentorship or potentially playing professionally in a league below the NBA or below overseas or something like the CEBL and that kind of stuff. Like, I think there's still a ton of opportunities to continue playing basketball after secondary school, after post-secondary, and I think the opportunities are just going to continue to grow.
No, definitely. And you look at places like in Europe, you can go get a contract for $100,000, which is still great money for players who are trying to pursue a professional career. And I think more people are understanding that the NBA is not the only option. You can play basketball South America, Europe, Asia, or even get a career, as you said, behind the scenes or doing media. But thank you for taking the time to answer a few questions and be a part of our documentary. We appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right.
I hope you can use some of that.